Sonic Mania is bad, according to some people. So this video today is a reassessment retrospectively to see how the community's attitudes on this game have shifted in the many years since it came out. Because we all know that when this game first released, it was a celebrated victory as the holy grail of 2D momentum Sonic. So much so that people joked like, 5 years from now, everyone will sour on the game and say it was overrated. And apparently that has happened, per LS Mark's reporting. The kind of reassessment that happened with Donkey Kong 64 or Tears of the Kingdom, and I predict it will happen with Donkey Kong Bonanza. So today I will be diving into some layers of this seemingly baffling dynamic as it pertains to Mania. By the end of this video, you will no longer be baffled by the vibe shift in opinion about this game. And I'm going to come out and say it right now. I am still a firm champion and defender that Sonic Mania is in fact quite good. So I'm going to go into some of the specific reasons for my opinion on Mania that I don't often see represented in the community that much. So I'm going to quickly solve that baffling mystery. How could people love the game so much at first, but then just do a 180 after a few years passed? These turncoats are, I would bet, only paying attention to a select slice of the game's mechanics and pacing, and that limited slice is the live system. For these peeps, the structure of their play sessions is technically try to get through the level without losing all your lives to get a game over. For this kind of Sonic gamer, the reason they boot up the game is for feel-good physics and controls, cool levels and situations, the music, right? So naturally, this will put a finite expiration date on what the game even has to offer. Each time you replay it, the novelty of the new level gimmicks, art, and music is just going to wear off. And what you're left with is a redundant gameplay experience. Because by your third playthrough, you're not going to get a game over, because you know the game decently well by that point. Some people who continue to enjoy Mania through the years, it could be because they're not just tunnel visioning on the instant gratification slice of just the live system, but they're actually playing the game with the full equation of its mechanics and pacing. So of course that's not only going to factor in the live system, but also time, rings, and badniks. This way, all portions of a level have stakes and reasons to stay interested and on point. You're showing what you got at the arcade, baby. But the folks playing on mellow mode with the live system with no real stakes, well, the first year the game comes out, they are going to be absolutely enamored with the Rube Goldberg level design moments in Mania. That should be no surprise. Playing the game is like a blissful roller coaster. It's so creative. This experience would be akin to how it first felt to play Sonic 2 the year that came out. I was there the year Sonic first went down the chemical plant ramp, and what that meant and represented. A real-life Rube Goldberg machine is a fancy contraption chain reaction. The legitimate physics carry out a continual cause and effect. So like these dominoes fall, which pushes this ball down a ramp, and that makes a deck of cards collapse, which tips a scale, and so on. It is a spectacle novelty, and it's meticulously crafted as a scripted set outcome. Now, Sonic Mania does have gameplay moments like these. It doesn't pervade the whole game or anything, but there are, for example, moments of Press Garden, where for several seconds, you're not even really playing the game per se. You're just watching the pre-planned level design play out a preset physics sequence. So it looks really cool and surprising in the first year the game comes out. Make no mistake, this general aspect is partly what Sonic is all about, definitely, especially if you were there for Chemical Plant. But in Mania, once you know what to expect, now you're just waiting through the fancy sequence to take back control of Sonic. It becomes non-interactive and superficial. So naturally, live system players will gradually find this more tiresome as the novelty inevitably wears off. But meanwhile, the people who are participating with the uncut, complete structure of the game, there's so much more happening in their playthrough of a level that the Rube Goldberg sequences become a nice break before you're thrust back into the high-stakes action. Mania has Sonic 3's scoring system of time, rings, and enemies, and with an amazing new addition, the cool bonus. This is a game changer and an excellent solution to an imperfection in the original Sonic game's scoring system. Because on the Sega Genesis, you take damage just once, and that's a huge punishing impact on your score. Because if you drop most of your rings, you're going to lose most of them. So if that happens late in an act, that's a huge deduction in your ring points at the final score tally. Disproportionate, you could say. So the problem this causes is that if you take just one hit, well, now for the rest of the act, you don't have much stakes left, since there's not many more points to protect once you've already lost the bulk of your ring bonus. So, Sonic Mania has one of many potential effective ways to solve this problem. With the cool bonus, you start each act with a 10,000 point voucher in your pocket that you can redeem at the end of the level for points. But the thing is, each time you take a hit, that voucher goes down by 1,000. So for example, if you take 2 hits in an act, your cool bonus will get you 8,000 at the score tally instead of the full 10,000. So this structure succeeds because even when you take damage, you can go into a boss with a lot of points still left to protect in that voucher. So now you're aspiring to defeat the boss taking no damage, and what this accomplishes, and this is important here, is that now there is substantive granularity to the way your gameplay is assessed. So it's not an all-or-nothing gambit anymore. Instead, it's a proportional reward that scales. So no more boring bosses with a foregone conclusion, bosses where you're just going through the motions. Sonic Mania has exceptionally good scoring calculations, and another big example of that is the special stages. Any good video game is a combination of a physical sport crossed with a board game with strategic considerations. So in the special stages, the way you earn the emerald is by juggling the priorities of spheres for Mach speed increase versus rings to increase the time remaining. It's just a treat. It's cool how there's this subtle puzzle element where you sort of had to ask yourself an experiment, like what Mach speed do I actually need to feasibly earn this emerald? If I go out of my way to get Mach 3, is that going to backfire? Or could I just rely on Mach 2 speed and take an efficient route with the minimum distance required to catch up? Amazing. It's a different calculation for each particular level. This is definitely better than the special stages in Sonic 1, 2, and 3, and maybe even a little bit better than Sonic CDs, which Sonic CD's special stages are very good. Now you can ask if bosses in Mania are also well designed in this manner, and my opinion is, in a lot of cases, yes, you'd be surprised. But I'll start by identifying the bad bosses. Press Garden Act 1, simply awful. You're going through the motions the same way every time, and it involves mandatory stretches of just waiting for the next opportunity. It starts to feel like a Sonic Superstars boss, jeez. Then we have the Oil Ocean Act 1 boss. It's just a boring retread of the Ice Cap Act 1 boss with a one-time cheap shot ceiling stunt. Nothing exciting or memorable. Before I defend some of the better bosses, I will touch up on the Oil Ocean Act 2 boss. This one is notable because the wide consensus is that the day the game came out, people were playing through their initial run, and a lot of people got stuck on this boss and game overed. I certainly game overed at this part, I admit it. And it was a little bit of a buzzkill at the time. It kind of popped the balloon of excitement for the day one flowing momentum. And I remember having the specific thought like, come on, the devs should have known what a damper this would put on our day one experience. But in retrospect, I think that thought that I had was a little bit entitled and unfair. The fact is, Sonic games can be hard. People forget this because you've been playing the original games for so many years that you know everything inside and out. But don't forget that the Sega difficulty is indeed present in a lot of the games. As a kid, it was a massive journey and ordeal just to even beat Sonic 3 and Knuckles. Sonic Superstars took this to an even further extent, perhaps to its own detriment. But okay now, if you were to ask around in the community for some of the best bosses in Mania, A lot of people are going to jump right to the boss in Press Garden Act 2. Now, it sounds obvious to say, but the reason this boss is good is because it's an actual boss. Closer to the standard level of boss quality you can get in Metroid games, Mega Man, Cuphead, because unfortunately most bosses on Sega Genesis are just following a pre-scripted set of instructions. They're not horrible or anything, they just don't give you much because they're playing out a similar pattern most of the time, so you're just dancing it on a repetitive, predictable muscle memory dance. So I appreciate the way that the Press Garden boss gradually ramps up the difficulty through the number of spike stars it will throw simultaneously. But also because this boss's movement patterns are more dynamic and reactive to what you're doing, instead of just a scripted, predetermined action path. Every time I fight this boss, it feels totally different and spontaneous. I love that. You compare this to Chemical Plant Act 1 or Flying Battery 1, those bosses are pretty much operating on autopilot, totally independent of where the player maneuvers. So to have Press Garden's boss be so dynamic and interesting, it does result in an imbalance of quality across bosses, but I am nonetheless appreciative to have a real boss present in Press Garden Act 2. I will now come to the defense of a couple of Mania bosses that a lot of people seem soured on. And the first is Studiopolis Act 1. The way you have to wait between the attack phases is certainly not ideal or anything, and it's also pretty lame that you have no direct contact or interaction with the boss itself. The boss is just hanging out in the background, and you're only interacting directly with the bombs that you parry. This boss also has no thematic connection to the Studiopolis level. It's just a helicopter and missiles. Now, all these things are indeed fair to bring up, but to show you now the unsung merit of this boss, look at this screenshot here and see if you can find the one thing on screen that actually gives this boss a dynamic, interesting equation. Have you found it yet? I spy with my little eye the redeeming component of the slopes. Now, the reason why the slopes matter so much is because, as any Sonic fan would know, slope angles have a significant effect on how you move and jump. As you know, jumping while moving up a slope is going to get you a lot more aerial height. You've been to Green Hill, you know how it works. And the converse of that is that if you attempt to jump while moving down a slope, your aerial reach will be much lower. So the reason why this boss fight is always on is that you constantly have to be evaluating the terrain just ahead to make sure you're jumping at the moment that won't crash you into a missile. So without the variable slopes component, this boss would be very bad and samey, but the idea that you're constantly having to reevaluate the territory and make confident clutch moves to jump while the opportunity's still there, that's what makes this boss a joy. And the transition ramps between phases are never bothersome for me because each gauntlet of bomb jumping is kind of tense. And so I actually like to have a little breather in between phases. Now, these auto-scrolling bosses with slopes is not something that originated in Sonic Mania. If anything, that would be Sonic Advance 2. Every single boss in that game is a high-speed chase with a moving boss. It never feels samey and repetitive, since there's so many different ways that the obstacle course can change based on the hills that you encounter, and the particular timing of Eggman's attacks. You can even use these hills for advanced methods where going up a slope gives you so much more jump height that you can go right to the boss without needing to use that little stepping stone platform. And so that's the reason why Some Call Me Johnny would call the Sonic Advance 2 bosses samey, is because these bosses are indeed just a boring chore if you're only playing on lives only mode. So to see this premise return in Sonic Superstar's final boss, I gotta say, I do appreciate it. It is very true to the core Sonic ingredients. If you've heard enough about bosses, you could just skip to the next chapter, but I have one more Sonic Mania boss to rush to the defense of, and that is the Flying Battery Spider boss. A lot of people really don't like this one, but I love it because first, it's just great that there's multiple different opportunities to damage the boss, not just with the obvious pole launcher, but also the more high-risk opportunities when there's a spike wall on both sides, and you can spin dash into a jump to bounce Eggman into the spikes. Love it. These advanced opportunities to hit the boss sooner are sorely lacking in Sonic Superstars, and it's inexcusable. The pacing of this spider boss is great. Eggman has his electric projectiles, but you can prevent him from using it by sort of babysitting him. You have to tend to him. When you keep knocking him to the ground repeatedly in a flow, he can't attack with those electric balls. So it becomes a matter of running away from him at just the right moment so you can get 2 hits in on the swing and pull. The way Eggman stumbles and bounces to the ground does seem to vary based on his position and also your velocity when you hit him, and also the rope physics, because full speed will knock him right across the screen. Again, what this ultimately provides that's very valuable is granularity, a proportional effect from the cause of your momentum, not just this turn-based dance. You're always reevaluating in that risk-reward dynamic. So when you consider the strengths of this game's bosses, score structure, and level design, how does that all mesh together with the story in the presentation? The story in Sonic Mania is pretty weak. I don't give it a lot of weight or hold it against the game all that much, which is why I get so baffled when I click on a review of Sonic Mania on YouTube and there's so many sentences and even paragraphs talking about why the scatterbrain story and locations in Mania drags the game down and prevents it from soaring to the heights of Sonic 3 or Sonic CD. Guys, first of all, this medium is video games. The medium of video games is highly defined by, like I said before, that equation of a physical sport board game. So listen, story and character motivations can certainly take a game to the next level, and if they're awful, they can ruin an otherwise good game, but they're not the kind of thing you would ramble on and on about as the biggest shortcoming of the game. I'm totally fine with the randomness of warping from level to level. This is a romp of a retrospective game, not a logical numbered sequel. People forget that the word Mania is in the title. It's not a mainline numbered one. It came as a Hail Mary at the tail end of a massive drought, and that meta context is factored into what we should even expect from the game. I mean, guys, the trailer said, we're going back, and it's $20 only. So for people to turn around and say that the game doesn't have much identity because it's mostly throwbacks, well, you have to consider that meta context as integral to the game. I will say it was a bizarre novel experience playing the game on day one and very frequently knowing my way around a certain area, with 20-year-old muscle memory kicking in because a lot of us know Chemical Plant inside and out. The Act 1 throwbacks replicate a lot of specific architecture sequences from the original games, and so it was a bizarre novelty to be familiar with where I was going in a new game, which I had just paid cash for, but the game was $20. So for me, the story or reused zones doesn't really drive down the overall quality of the game that much. If anything suffers in the presentation department, it's really just a few specific small things. Cracks in the armor that undermine player confidence in the overall quality of vision. The game has a few tone-deaf stumbles, and they're not these massive glaring disasters, but just these really targeted awful moments that I'm gonna identify right now. You might think these are nitpicks, but I aim to show you otherwise, okay? The way Sonic looks up when you hold up. It's so bad, and why is that? It's because it's not true to Sonic. Sonic looks so overeager and try-hard, exerting all this jumping physical exertion just to look up, bro. Looking up, which is an action you can do all the way back in Sonic 1, why does it suddenly require this desperate energy? There's an age-old saying in the theater world, what does an actor do when the doorbell rings? And the answer to that is, he answers the door. Now, it sounds obvious to say that, but the point is that you have to realistically react and interact with your surroundings with proportional energy that's suitable. If you're trying to see something up above you, going on your tiptoes is going to earn you almost nothing. Similarly, for widening your eyes, it's almost as silly as, you know those glow-in-the-dark toys you had as a kid that absorb sunlight and then they glow in the dark? They're not going to charge any faster if you walk into your backyard and then raise the toy above your head. Do you know how far away the sun is? When I look at this horrible look-up sprite in Mania, this is just hemorrhaging the cool factor. It's spilling onto the ground. I get the sense that this first came to be on paper, first and foremost. Like they sat down and thought, how can we update these classic action animations to have more modern, interesting detail? So we have Sonic going up on his tiptoes with just this wide-eyed, manic expression. It's just antithetical to Sonic's chill, cool vibe. But it shouldn't have to be fixed with a mod. Now, I sort of think that the new ring scattering effect is being part of this problem, too. They sat down and said, how can we spice up the existing trope of losing all your rings? So you have all these rings flying toward the camera and getting larger with perspective because they're getting closer to you, the player. So that's meta, and now the game is 2.5D. I'm not really fond of that. It's almost like this debris that flies up to assault your eyes. A cocoa melon explosion of lots of particles, pandering to the demographics that would be successfully pandered in Donkey Kong Bonanza, with all those jillions of particles flying around at all times. Sonic Mania's ring scattering just feels just a little bit too try-hard, like, okay, we get it. Rings are wackily flying everywhere. Would you stop? And yes, I know that Knuckles Chaotix did this type of thing. Look at this here. But that was the 32X. They were trying out gimmicky graphical touches just because they could, with the increased processing power that a vanilla Sega Genesis lacked. Now, another common criticism of this game is the level transitions. And the original gangsters who were present when Mania first launched, before the Sonic Mania Plus expansion, you'll remember the glaring lack of transitions in certain zones. But even once all transitions were implemented, there's still really nothing special. You get in the gun at Mirage Saloon and it just fires you over to Oil Ocean. Who cares? That's just duct taping levels together. Level transitions were such a mind-blowing addition to Sonic 3 when that first hit the market in the 90s. So I consider it inexcusable that the Press Garden Act 2 transition does what it does, which is almost nothing. When the game first came out, did you experience this moment the way that I did? Okay, I finished the Act 1 boss, the score tally completes, and I'm just on the edge of my seat seeing what's going to happen next. So Sonic starts walking to the right, and the pacing of that moment is, I'm thinking to myself, oh cool, where's he going? What's he going to do? What's going to play out? But then he just comes to a stop. And so I have that moment of asking myself, wait, that's it? What was the point of this? And only then do you realize, oh, okay, the background is snowing. So is the background being snowy itself supposed to be the thing that's happening and interesting in the moment? Any good game developer has a good spider sense of communicating just enough information so that they're in tune with what the player will notice and when. But when Sonic comes to a stop, you just have that whiplash of like, wait, what's supposed to happen? Oh, the dev team thought I would be fascinated just by the fact that it's snowing? Who gives a care? That's super random, especially for this new level that we don't know anything about until this game. It would have been another thing entirely if they had taken a classic zone and reimagined Act 2 to be covered in snow. Like if they brought back, let's say, Marble Garden and Act 2 was covered in snow due to something specific Robotnik did. You know, an in-universe explanation for the environment. It's not rocket science. But no, it's just Press Garden Act 2 stitched after Act 1, connected to the factory with the lumber cutting devices, but having nothing to do with the snowy weather. Now, I don't know if I was supposed to be impressed and wowed by the Titanic Monarch level design of 4 different branches that you can play in any order. The old hub and spoke structure, as we say in the biz. I did not like this when the game first came out, and I still don't really like it. It turns the final epic level into this laundry list of, alright, I gotta go to this one, and then I just gotta go do this other one. Neither has an effect on the other, and there's no indicator about what's inside each of the 4 branches when you're standing in the hub spot. I'm just picking one at random anyway, so what's the point of that choice? It's basically a randomizer for your first couple of playthroughs, but even now I couldn't tell you which branch leads to what kind of hazards, so that should kind of tell you something. I'm gonna come out and say it. Triple Trouble 16-bit did it better. In the Atomic Destroyer last level, you have different branching ways to go. And because Triple Trouble 16 is a fan game, that is the proper avenue for experimentation like that. Not in the "we're going back" anniversary celebration. And the final boss has its issues that don't bother me much nowadays, but if I have to put my objective hat on in a debate, I do need to acknowledge them. The boss gets easier the longer you fight it. What is that about? Talk about an anticlimax. It does become relevant and interesting for the speedrun dynamic since your strats can evolve throughout each phase, but most people will just feel it's an anticlimax if they're just playing on the live system. And then the TikTok structure of warping to other random rooms and then coming back, I hate that. It undermines the immersion when the developers just click and drag Sonic into a totally different environment. And even worse, that the thing it brings you to is very often just non-interactive. You guys realize that this is the type of boss structure that set the stage for Sonic Superstars, right? You're just waiting and dodging for the next opportunity you can actually participate. Thank you for that, Sonic Mania. And did you guys know that the hard-boiled heavies that appear in the final boss are actually illusions? Like you already fought the real version in each zone, but to raise the stakes for the finale, you're fighting fake versions. It's supposed to be the other way around. And why would I care about fighting these bosses if they could just always be resurrected as phantoms? You fight Phantom Ganon early on in the Forest Temple, and then you fight the true Ganondorf at the finale. That's the way it should work, but hey, with the Sonic Mania credits crawling, it's time to render my final assessment as to how I subjectively rate the quality of this game. And this has been Alex Yard here at 91.6 WAYZ, the Alex Yard Zone, deep in the heart of Boston. So, if people say the game is bad now, I disagree with that. The game was always solid. Those complainers are just feeling the delayed effects of their limited slice mellow mode playing only with the live system. Sonic Mania has a solid set of levels. It understood the assignment, and it gives you a whole lot to enjoy and dive into. But I will also need to disagree with the people who say that Mania beat Sega at their own game and totally topped Sonic 1, 2, and 3. I strongly disagree with that. When people say, oh, the Mania developers understand the Sonic experience better than Sonic Team. No, absolutely not. It's kind of like kids that grew up watching The Simpsons, and then as adults they become writers on the show, and they just spam Homer's catchphrases for fan service. Sonic Mania is pandering to mellow mode spectacle seekers by giving them lots of fluid, satisfying slopes and Rube Goldberg physics chain reactions. And while all of these things are indeed fun and definitely a component of the Sonic experience, this doesn't in itself represent the complete main course. It's the entire gameplay equation in total. Lives, time, ring, badniks, with cool bonus, that is the full structure, which, although good, does lead to a particular problem in the number of levels and the massive length of the levels. It's always sort of a strange quandary when someone reviews the game and says, yeah, it's a little bit too long, the pacing gets stretched out, and you're sort of exhausted by the time you get to the last handful of levels. Hydro City is always typically a buzz killer when you arrive, even though it's only the halfway point of the game. It is, for many players, the moment where you're like, all right, I think I'll just stop this session for today, maybe play through the rest of it in a couple of days. It's a weird thing because, in theory, more content should be objectively better. And ultimately, it's great to get more content, like 12 different zones, each with 2 acts. It's sort of amazing, especially considering the price. That total zone tally is actually close to what Sonic 3 and Knuckles has, but the difference is that Sonic 3 has a few lightning-quick zones, or acts, whereas Mania has so many sprawling zones that it just doesn't have the same brisk progress forward. Stardust Speedway is the only one you can really zip through, and maybe Green Hill. So Mania loses the sit-down and play structure of Sonic 2 or 3, where you can very feasibly beat the game in one sitting. Playing through Mania in just one session is not really as practical or enjoyable. So what I've done in the meantime is structure my sessions around the two halves of the game, 6 zones each, and if I do a score points wager for the first half, it means I just start at the beginning, and then the final boss of that particular session is the Stardust Speedway boss, which is pretty fitting. And then the back half starts with Hydro City Zone all the way through to the finale. So the very last thing I'm going to touch upon here before the fade to black is, of course, Encore mode. I like it a lot, and I will defend it, even though it doesn't have like a ton to offer or anything. I absolutely love the alternate color palettes of each zone. I think it's really awesome. That's the kind of thing that does go a long way for longtime fans, but newcomers to the game probably would not really care if they don't have that back catalog of nostalgia to compare against the new epic colors of Chemical Plant, for example. And then the Arcade Limited Lives character system is pretty cool, and I find that I almost never locate those monitors to add a character. They're very hard to find, and I do respect it. I just personally don't feel like playing a Sonic game with that super exploration mindset to stop and inspect every possible lead, but I totally respect it as giving you something new, an additional structure for the Plus expansion. The special stage entrances are also very difficult to find in the Encore mode, and I've never gotten all the emeralds in Encore mode, so I thoroughly appreciate that fact that there's new special stages in Encore mode. They raise the stakes. They're super difficult, and that's an awesome replay value thing, where now you have a reason to keep playing the game, so you gradually get better with each attempt that you earn to try a special stage again. In closing, you'll notice this video didn't much touch upon the development studio behind the scenes and what they went on to do in the aftermath of Sonic Mania. Francis Ford Coppola used the structure of the Godfather novels to make his movie, but then when he came up with his own story and premise for Megalopolis, you all saw how that went. This video tried to focus on Mania's gameplay without that meta baggage. And I do have a different video on this channel about that baggage, but just to keep this video focused on gameplay, I will not even now show you that video thumbnail or title on screen now. You have to go find it. Have at it though, because those are valuable lessons that need to be learned and have not yet been learned in some critical segments of our Hedgehog community. And also the Celeste Dev Studio 2, which imploded on account of the same type of unchecked indie hubris. Anyways, see you on my main music theory channel at some point to do a Mania All Emeralds playthrough livestream as Ray the Flying Squirrel. Good night, everybody. Hang on to your cool bonus. Otherwise, how are you going to beat my highest score for Sonic Mania Green Hill to Stardust Speedway? The cool bonus is very useful for that.